Game over, Goku! Now you're free!
Ever since the early days when we first saw Master Roshi use the Kamehameha wave, Dragon Ball has been host to some of anime's coolest and most recognizable attacks. Though moves like the Gallic Gun and Masenko stand out as some of the more popular ones, there's a slew of powerful energy attacks that trump even Goku's Kamehameha in pure destructive force. We all know that energy attacks raise the user's power level, but these moves in particular completely exceed their user's power to deal damage, usually at a cost. Today, I'll be diving into the lore and power of these attacks, but before we begin, here are some ground rules. The moves I'll be covering will be energy attacks only, and specifically damage-dealing offensive techniques. So for example, there won't be anything like the Evil Containment Wave, Hit's Time Freeze, the Solar Flare, or any kind of barriers like Android 17's. This will also disclude physical techniques like Tien's Volleyball Attack, magical abilities like Moro's Absorption, and spiritual techniques like Forced Spirit Fission. So just energy attacks, specifically those whose power greatly exceeds the power of their user. When it comes to beam attacks, the Tri-Beam is one of the most devastating in the whole series. Seemingly developed by Master Shen and taught to Tien as what would become his signature move, though members of the cast like Vegeta and his Big Bang attack would eventually outscale Tien heavily, the Tri-Beam manages to keep him relevant far beyond many of the other human characters. The most famous example of this is during the Cell Saga versus an imperfect Cell who would easily manhandle Super Saiyan Vegeta from the start of the arc, who in turn would again easily handle Tien without breaking a sweat. The Neo Tri-Beam manages to pin down this same Cell for an extended period, providing time for the others to escape. Though the attack doesn't damage him, the sheer force of it not only stops Cell in his tracks, but knocks him back significantly, despite the stunning power differential between them, to put it lightly. This isn't the first nor the last time that we'll see Tien and his Tri-Beam having such a massive effect on opponents with significantly higher strength. During the Saiyan Saga, in the harrowing initial battle against Nappa, Tien is enraged by Chaozu's death and uses a one-handed Spirit Tri-Beam against the Saiyan. Tien's power level this fight was less than half of Nappa's, but despite this, in the anime, he manages to break Nappa's armor, and Vegeta even states that had he not blocked it at the last second, the attack could have killed him. Not just heavily damaged, but killed, with only one hand. For contrast, here's an enraged Gohan who reaches the power level of 2800, completely eclipsing Tien, firing a full power Masenko at Nappa, which Nappa knocks away easily and says it only stung a little. Next, during the fight between Mystic Gohan and Super Buu with Gotenks absorbed, Buu attempts to fire a killing blow against Dende, which Tien manages to block with a shot from his Tri-Beam. Considering the pure uncontested strength of this Super Buu and how outclassed Tien had been since the Frieza arc, this is a considerable feat. Tien and his Kikoho don't get as much love in Super, but we do see him take out an entire wave of Frieza Force soldiers all at once during the ROF movie. During the Tournament of Power, Tien's Tri-Beam takes down and completely disables an enemy whose attacks were threatening even Gohan, and it was specifically stated that Tien wasn't strong enough to defend against his beams.
Neo Tri-Beam!
Now, it's not certain that Harurama has much defensive strength. In fact, it's probably unlikely that he does, that's why he's a petty little sniper, but it's nonetheless worth mentioning as one of the Tri-Beam's few feats in Super. How exactly the Tri-Beam overpowers so many other beams in the series is hard to say, but it's likely due to the toll it takes on the user, drawing on the wielder's lifespan, turning that into power for the attack. While it's an incredibly risky move, Tien makes great use of it throughout the series.
I have to use enough force to wipe him out, but if I use too much energy, it's all over. This has to be perfect.
As far as pure deadly force is concerned, Krillin's signature Destructo Disc is pretty hard to top. It's also one of the only moves on this list without a massive downside. The disc's razor-sharp edge has allowed Krillin to compete with opponents far beyond his own power. The premier example is when he manages to slice off second form Frieza's tail.
Time to die.
What? Who did that? You, Vegeta?
This Frieza, with a power level of about 1 million, is over 13 times stronger than Krillin at 75,000. 13 times! And it glided through his tail like it was nothing. Of course, this didn't really end well for Krillin, but moving back to the Saiyan saga, again, we have another example against Nappa. Krillin during this fight is even weaker than Tien, but when he throws his Destructo Disc toward Nappa, Vegeta has to warn the blockhead to get out of the way, as the disc would have sliced straight through him.
Nappa! Don't touch it!
Again, this is a foe who is over twice as strong as Krillin. Though it has some amazing feats, the Destructo Disc does not have infinite cutting ability. Enemies with powerful auras like Cell are able to eat the attack with no threat, and its more solid form compared to beam attacks, though seemingly what gives it its cutting power, certainly has its drawbacks. Compared to other attacks, it's relatively slow moving, and due to it being solid, enemies are able to catch it midair and avoid its edge, like Vinegar and Jiren. Fast forward to the superhero movie with possibly this move's most impressive feat. Though it didn't actually cut anything, the Destructo Disc manages to halt Cell Max, visibly pushing him back and completely stopping his charge against Android 18. The power gap between this Krillin and Cell Max is similar to the gap between Jiren and Yamcha's singed corpse after he was killed by a Cyberman. If you don't believe me, here's Krillin getting his ass kicked by a robot bee not long before this. There are a ton of variations of the Destructo Disc, including the homing versions like Frieza's Death Saucer, and the splitting ability of Krillin's own future iterations. It's an extremely versatile attack with very few downsides, and is one of the major reasons that Krillin has stayed relevant in future arcs. Anyway, moving on. Piccolo's most powerful creation, the Special Beam Cannon, is one of the most iconic moves in all of Dragon Ball, especially now after the release of the superhero movie. I see the Makanko Sappo as sort of a fusion between the power of the Tri-Beam and the Destructo Disc. It's able to charge up incredible power depending on how long you wait, and on top of that, it has insane piercing power due to its actual technique of focusing all the energy into a single point, like the edge of a Destructo Disc. The Special Beam Cannon's premiere showcases just how strong it can be, taking down an enemy that was over 3 to 4 times stronger than Piccolo during that arc. Depending on what you believe, the cannon was either slightly stronger than Raditz when it collided with him, or slightly weaker, as Raditz's power level is stated as either 1200 or 1500. Personally, I believe that Raditz is at 1500 for a few reasons. Firstly, when Gohan is enraged during the fight and his power level spikes to over 1300, he catches Raditz off guard with a headbutt and it does significant damage. In my opinion, had this attack from Gohan really been over 100 power levels stronger than Raditz, it would have done much more than just knock him back and daze him, like maybe completely knock him out. Furthermore, during the initial fights with the Cybermen who were stated to be as strong as Raditz, Yamcha goes pretty toe-to-toe with his, even getting thrown around a little bit in the anime. And though the fight is quick, he only takes down his Cybermen with a final beam attack, which we know increases the user's power level, usually significantly. This Yamcha had a base power level of 1480. Had the Cybermen only been 1200, it probably wouldn't have been much of a fight at all, and I doubt it could have even killed him with his self-destruction, but I'm only basing that on what power we've seen from other self-destruction moves later in the series. And it's possible that Yamcha was kind of taking it easy, but I doubt it. Lastly, the Special Beam Cannon that kills Raditz was a power level of 1330, which, due to its enhanced piercing power, has no need to be above 1500 to deal the type of damage that it did. These are of course my opinions, however I admit that I'm a bit of a Raditz wanker, so if you disagree, feel free to tell me why in the comments. Moving on from the Raditz fight, during Super and Piccolo's fight with Frost, it appears that Piccolo wants to charge the Special Beam Cannon as a trump card against the Frieza lookalike. Though it wasn't his actual intended plan, everyone seemed to believe, including Frost, that the beam would be effective enough against him to win the fight had it connected. This Piccolo was earlier told by Goku that he probably had no chance against Frost in the first place, so the power gap must have been quite substantial. Later on, during the Tournament of Power, Piccolo uses the Special Beam Cannon to take out the rival Namekians of Universe 6 in one shot.
Special beam cannon!
These Namekians gave Piccolo and Gohan together quite a bit of trouble, one of them even going toe-to-toe with Gohan in a beam struggle, and maybe even overpowering him a little bit. Their assimilating of all the other Universe 6 Namekians made them significantly stronger than Piccolo, which makes his piercing through both of them with ease that much more impressive of a feat. Unfortunately, as is shown during this battle and all those listed before, the Special Beam Cannon has a massive downside in the time it takes to charge up the attack. As well as in the fight with Frost, we see the detriment it has on the user's mobility. Finally, Gohan's use of the Makanko Sappo against Cell Max during the superhero movie, a fight that is stated to be the fiercest in Dragon Ball history, which would include Goku and Vegeta versus Gas. Whether you take this statement at its word is up to you, of course, but if you believe it, that would mean that this Special Beam Cannon that Gohan Beast used would be, at least at the time of this fight, the most powerful attack ever used.
Special beam cannon!
Before I jump into the Spirit Bomb as a move, I just want to address that I have seen some arguments that the Genkidama is a spirit attack and not an energy one. For example, if it was energy, then androids would be able to feed infinite power into it due to their infinite energy sources, but that doesn't seem to be the case, as well as planets and earthlings being able to provide any significant amount of power, when basically all of the universe's civilians could be eclipsed by Vegeta's power alone. Despite this, the move has been called energy and an energy ball so many times, and it's one of Dragon Ball's most iconic finishers, so I decided to put it here on the list. As for its usage, we all know how the Spirit Bomb works, gathering energy from life forms who willingly give it up. It's the ability to gather energy from outside sources that makes it viable for this list, ensuring that the blast itself has far more power than the user could accumulate alone. Taught to Goku by King Kai, it's used as the finishing move in some of the most iconic fights in Dragon Ball's history, serving as the last-ditch effort in the battle versus Kid Buu, completely destroying him even though Goku had no energy left of his own. Interestingly, though the Spirit Bomb is a signature of Goku, one of its most effective uses was actually by Trunks during the Zamasu arc. Using only the energy from the heroes and a few remaining humans on Earth, he transfers the Spirit Bomb's energy into his sword and manages to take down fused Zamasu. The same Zamasu that was, in the anime of course, going toe-to-toe with Vegito Blue for a time, and completely manhandling Goku and Vegeta. This usage manages to negate one of the primary drawbacks of the Spirit Bomb, its massive size and forced stance on the creator, as well as its ability to be pushed back like we saw with Jiren. However, like the Special Beam Cannon, the Spirit Bomb's main downfall is its charging time, and incredibly obvious telegraphing. Further to this, Goku has to drop to his base form to even begin charging it, leaving him in a much weaker and more vulnerable state. Despite all the downsides to the Spirit Bomb, when it is charged, it still manages to get the job done in situations where nothing else will suffice. Before we move on to the final and strongest move in all of Dragon Ball, I want to mention a few attacks that didn't quite make the list. Though they're strong, they don't fit the criteria of eclipsing the wielder's power. The best example of this is the first of the honorable mentions, the Final Explosion. The Final Explosion, while an incredibly powerful offensive attack, doesn't seem to harness any additional power surpassing the user. It's similar to the Tri-Beam in that Vegeta sacrifices his life to put all of his energy into the move, but it just doesn't go above and beyond Vegeta's own power the same way the Tri-Beam does. This is backed up by the fact that during the Tournament of Power, Vegeta uses the Final Explosion as well as Android 17 using his own variation, and neither actually take the life of the user, or take out any enemies that are significantly beyond their own power. Gotank's Super Ghost Kamikaze attack, first of all, is just fucking cool. I mean, the guy can create sentient beings to fight for him. The reason it's an honorable mention and not on the main list is simply because we know that as the user's power increases, the ghost's power increases as well, and it doesn't seem like the ghosts ever exceed the capabilities of the one who summoned them. However, the ability to summon multiple, coupled with the fact that they are somewhat intelligent and can be issued orders, makes it incredibly powerful and unique. Goku Black's God Slicer, used upon his obtaining of the Sickle of Sorrow, is probably the most terrifying technique we've seen in Dragon Ball so far. Though it's one of many attacks invented by Zamasu among moves like the Lightning of Absolution or Blades of Judgment, the sheer versatility of the God Slicer was enough to completely trap and overpower Goku and Vegeta single-handedly. As Black swings the Sickle of Sorrow, the God Slicer opens a rift in space-time to some unknown dimension. This rift not only creates an infinite source of equally powerful Goku Black clones, it also hampers spiritual techniques as Goku isn't able to use his instant transmission while in its vicinity. The actual attack that causes the rift is intended to be a damage-dealing one. Unfortunately, it doesn't actually hit anyone, and the most powerful part is the rift it opens, so I don't think I can include it on the main list, even though I'd love to. The final attack on my list is a complicated one. While Hakai is performed by harnessing the energy of destruction, it seems like there are some variations that aren't particularly energy based. There are two different types of destruction. Initially, the power of destruction, which destroyers learn to harness, which can then be turned into the energy of destruction, which can be fired as a ranged attack or given to others to use. This energy seems like a weaker version, as we see by Goku and Frieza being able to resist it in the anime, but in both anime and manga, there are times where the power of destruction is harnessed as the actual Hakai technique, which removes matter from the universe. Weaker versions like the one Goku tried using against Zamasu, and Beerus succeeded in using against Zamasu, only turn the target into dust. However, there is another way to use the technique that, upon destroying matter, releases a massive blast of energy dependent on the size of the object destroyed. This version is the one that tops the list as the most powerful energy attack, because again, once mastered, depending on the size of the object, the explosion can far exceed the power of the actual perpetrator of the technique. This is not to mention the fact that yes, it still actually removes matter from the universe, which isn't part of the release of energy, so I'm choosing not to count it as why the attack is so high up, because that kind of feels like cheating. But the sheer ratio between power put in versus force that comes out is why it tops this list in its explosive energy form. Further to this, the Hakai doesn't really have any downsides like the rest of the attacks on the list. The fact that you have to completely erase a target to create the burst of energy could be considered a downside since the attack isn't very versatile, but compared to shortening your lifespan with each use, it's not much of a negative. Personally, I'm a massive Zamasu simp, so it was hard not to put the God Slicer or Lightning of Absolution on the main list, but they just don't quite fit in with the rest of the attacks. That said, do you think this list is fair? Is it cheating to put the Hakai at number 1? Let me know what your favorite attack in Dragon Ball is, what you think is the strongest, and if I should do another video including non-damaging techniques like the Evil Containment or Solar Flare. But until then, hopefully we'll see more of these cool and creative moves in Dragon Ball's future.
This will be my greatest, most powerful coming!